You have $100, not 10,000, not an unexpected inheritance from a great uncle whose face you can barely picture, not a quarterly bonus that landed in your account during a generous moment. Just $100, the kind of money that evaporates over a single weekend without leaving a receipt in your memory. The kind you've handed over for things you couldn't list by Tuesday morning. An amount that simultaneously feels too insignificant to bother with and too painful to part with. This is the starting line, not a master plan, not a polished investment thesis, not a brokerage account you've spent half a year vetting. It begins with $100 and a choice that feels almost laughably modest given the mountain you're trying to climb. You make the choice anyway. You configure the recurring transfer. You select the index fund. You refuse to spiral into analysis because analysis is the exact thing that stranded you on the sidelines last year and the year before that one. You hit confirm, and then nothing. The screen displays $100. The market wobbles 0.3%, and your $100 becomes $99.70. You refresh the app 3 times before turning out the light. This is what a beginning actually looks like, and it bears no resemblance to the version you pictured. The account just sits there. You feed it $100. A month the way you'd water a houseplant you suspect might be dead. Sometimes the figure climbs. Sometimes it slips. 6 months pass and the balance shows 578. You ran the math before you ever started. You knew it would land somewhere near that. 578 doesn't rewrite anyone's future. It's not a number you bring up at brunch. It's a quiet figure inside an app you've started opening less often, because opening it stopped delivering any kind of emotional payoff. This is the chapter no one writes about, because there's no story to tell. The first half year of putting away $100 a month isn't a narrative. It's a behavior. And behaviors, before they generate outcomes, only generate themselves. You're training a consistency muscle in a gym, whose mirrors haven't caught up to your reps yet. You keep showing up regardless. You move the $100, the system swallows it without applause. There's a parallel version of you who quits right around here. Not in some cinematic moment of surrender, but quietly, with a single skipped transfer because money felt tight that month. Then another skip. Then the balance just hovers at $578 for 4 silent months. And you stop opening the app. And then you stop logging in entirely. And 12 months later, the habit has dissolved and the 578 is still parked, somewhere generating crumbs because you never reallocated it into anything meaningful. That version of you isn't lazy. That version of you is just human. The chasm between knowing the right move and continuing to make it while nothing visible cheers you on. That's where most people quietly slip out the side door. You stay. You don't yet understand the value of staying, but you will. After 12 months, your contributions total $200. The account reads $1,312. The market behaved itself reasonably well, and you're up $112 above your deposits. $112. You could pull that in by picking up a Saturday shift. It's not a thrilling figure, and you're sharp enough to recognize that, and patient enough to remain anyway. Here's what year 1 delivered that the dashboard refuses to show. You forged a relationship with patience that most of your peers haven't bothered to develop. 12 separate times. $100 sat in front of you that could have become takeout, and 12 separate times it became ownership of something instead. Not because you're morally superior to the person who ordered the takeout, but because you made one specific call about one specific $100, and then you kept making it. The repetition itself is the bedrock, not the 1,312. The bedrock is the rhythm. You also discovered something about your own life this year. You discovered that nothing fell apart without that $100. The month survived. The emergencies. You'd mentally allocated that. $100 toward mostly never showed up, and on the rare occasions they did, the money materialized from somewhere else entirely. The $100 was never structurally necessary to your monthly life. It only impersonated necessity. The vast majority of people never put that impersonation to the test. You tested it 12 consecutive months, and 12 consecutive times the test came back negative. That's a more useful finding than any $112 in market gains. You're 26 months in. Your deposits sum to $2,600. The account reads $3,100. The figure is starting to carry a bit of gravity. Not life-altering gravity, but perceptible gravity. The kind of number where you can faintly trace the silhouette of something that wasn't there before. A subtle shift arrives in year 2. The check-ins occur less out of nervousness and more out of interest. You stop scanning for catastrophe and start tracking for accumulation. That's a mental pivot most people take far longer to make, and plenty never make at all. The investor who opens their app in fear and the investor who opens it in fascination are looking at identical holdings. They are not living the same emotional reality. And they will not behave identically when the floor drops out. The floor drops out, naturally. It tumbles 14% across 11 weeks. Kicking off in a month you'd rather erase for reasons unrelated to money. You watch 380 vanish. The account that just read $3,100 now reads $2,670. You feel it somewhere between your ribs and your gut, in a spot without a clean name. You sit with the feeling. You don't sell. You execute the $100 transfer right on schedule, because the schedule doesn't take meetings with market conditions. That $100 picks up more shares than it would have a quarter ago, because everything's marked down. You don't make a ceremony out of it. You just keep moving. 8 months later, when the market has clawed its way back, your account sits at $3,900. The shares you scooped up during the slide are now worth more than you paid for them. The discipline of the bleak months compounded silently. It does this every single time, and every single time you'll forget it did. And the forgetting is fine, so long as the behavior holds. Year 3 closes out. You've contributed $3,600. The account reads $4,750. You're $150, ahead of what you've deposited. Compounding is finally surfacing as something tangible. Not flashy, but tangible. The space between your contributions and your balance is widening in your direction, and it's going to keep widening. And the widening is going to accelerate. And at some point, the gains will quit, feeling like a happy bonus, and start feeling like a co-investor, like there's a second person quietly funding the account beside you each month. That second person is time. Time is the one investor who never forgets a deposit, never panics, and never bails out at the bottom. You're 29, 60 months of $100, contributions totaling $6,000, account balance hovering near $8,200 at a 10% average annual return, which sits roughly in line with the long-run S&P 500 average. Not promised, not guaranteed, but historically observed. $8,200. You're sitting on $2,200. You didn't deposit. You hold more than the average American keeps in savings, not because your paycheck dwarfs theirs, not because you were dealt a better hand, but because you launched a particular habit at a particular moment and refused to abandon it. Through 12 months of nothing, through a downturn that felt weirdly personal, and through that stretch in year 4, where you genuinely contemplated pausing and didn't pull the trigger. Here's what $8,200 isn't. It isn't a retirement. It isn't enough by itself to put you in a house. And it isn't financial freedom. People will inform you that $8,200 is meaningless in the grand scheme of long-term wealth. And they'll be technically right and entirely wrong about its significance. Because $8,200 isn't the point. $8,200 is the receipt. The receipt that you can grow something out of next to nothing across a long horizon, with no windfall, no oversized salary, and no flawless blueprint. The receipt that the system actually works when you actually feed it. The receipt that you are the kind of person who keeps feeding it. That identity outweighs the $8,200 by a wide margin. The identity is what travels with you. 5 years deep, the account is expanding, and something else is expanding. In parallel, that has zero connection to market performance. Your relationship to money has shifted, not because there's more of it, but because your awareness of it has sharpened. You notice where it flows. You can distinguish purchases that build something from purchases that buy only the next 10 minutes. You're not punishing yourself. You're not surviving on lentils and willpower. You took the trip. You bought the thing you wanted. You just did it within a framework that protected the $100 because the $100 stopped being a sacrifice and became something closer to a fixed law of your month. Your patience has shifted too. You've now lived through both directions of the market, and your reflex in either direction has matured. You no longer flinch, you witness. You've learned that a red number on some random Tuesday isn't a forecast of the future. It's a snapshot of right now, and right now expires. And the future has no memory of how Tuesday felt. Your conversations around money sound different. You absorb other people's investing talk differently. You hold real opinions now, ones backed by lived experience. When someone confides that they're waiting for the perfect window to start, you skip the lecture. You remember exactly what waiting felt like. You remember the years that came before the click. You offer something brief and honest, and you let it go. And there's a heavier piece, the drift. A subtle gap begins to widen between you and the people in your orbit who aren't constructing anything. Not because you've outgrown them, but because your priorities now express themselves in tiny daily choices, and tiny daily choices stack into a fundamentally different existence. Sometimes it surfaces as a loneliness you can't quite label. You're traveling in a direction the people around you aren't traveling, and the pace is so gradual that nobody clocks it, including you, until one day you glance over your shoulder and register the distance. You're 34, 120 months in. Total contributions, $12,000. Account balance, around $2,500. You're $8,500 ahead of what you put in. The returns are now pulling real weight. In just the last 12 months, your portfolio kicked back roughly $1,700 with zero additional effort from you. No raise, no side gig, just the shares you accumulated across a decade, multiplying through one another. This is the lesson the books and the podcasts and the financial advisors keep trying to convey, and it never genuinely registers until you watch it unfold in your own account with your own dollars. The returns are now arriving at a clip approaching your own monthly contribution. You deposit $100, and the market, on a typical year, is generating something like $140 a month off the existing pile. Your money is now earning money, not at a sensational pace, but at a perceptible one, and at a pace that's picking up speed. Reflect on what you've assembled with $100 a month. Reflect on what you didn't surrender to do it. You didn't pack up and move back to your parents. You didn't pick up a second job. You didn't strip your life of the things that made it feel like yours. You gave up $100 every month, and a decade later, you're sitting on $2,500 inside a portfolio growing faster than the deposits feeding it, and a habit so rooted, it no longer feels like a habit. It feels like part of who you are. You're 44 now, 2 full decades into this. Total contributions, $24,000. Account balance at a 10% average annual return, roughly $76,000. You're $52,000. North of your contributions. The distance between what went in and what's there is now more than twice the total you've ever deposited. You didn't pull off anything heroic to land here. You didn't outsmart the market. You didn't snipe a winning stock. You weren't handed a mentor, an inheritance, or a stroke of luck that bent the trajectory. You had $100 a month and 20 years, and compounding behaved exactly the way. Compounding behaves when you stop interfering with it. $76,000 carries actual weight now. It's a number that influences decisions. It's a number with enough density to anchor something bigger, should you decide to expand on it. And here's the easily overlooked truth about year 20. The acceleration has barely warmed up. The account isn't climbing in a straight line. It's climbing exponentially, and the exponential portion is only just emerging into view. In year 1, the market handed back $112. In year 10, it handed back roughly $700 across a single year. In year 20, the account is generating around $7,000 annually. $7,000 a year off $100 a month. You contribute $200 across 12 months, and the account tacks on $7,000 of its own. The system has taken over as the lead contributor. You're nearly along for the ride at this stage, and the entire ride traces back to a $100 transfer you punched in on a Tuesday night in an apartment you've long since left behind. You're 54. Total contributions, $36,000. Account balance, in the neighborhood of $227,000. Over the span, consistency and compound interest manufactured. $191,000 that you never deposited, never traded labor for, and never lucked into. You assembled it by performing one tiny act each month for 30 years and refusing to stop. At 54, with $227,000 generating a 10% historical average, your account is throwing off about $22,700 a year while you don't lay a finger on the principal. That's nearly $1,900. A month produced by a starter sum of $100, the engine you built out of loose change is now generating income that brushes up against what plenty of people pull in, working a full schedule. And there are still 10 years on the clock before the standard retirement age. You're 64. You've put in $48,000 across 40 years of $100. Monthly transfers. Your balance at a historically typical return is approximately $637,000. $637,000 from $48,000. The remainder, $589,000, was never earned in any conventional sense. It expanded, fed by time and by your stubborn refusal to stop, by those 48,000 micro-decisions you executed month after month. When that $100 could have drifted somewhere else and instead drifted here, each month felt insignificant. Each month felt too tiny to matter. Each downturn you rode out without flinching. Each calendar year that came and went without fanfare or visible momentum. Each Tuesday transfer that no one ever noticed or applauded. All of it layered. All of it compounding. All of it converging right here. You've been moving through numbers. The numbers are real. The numbers count. And the numbers aren't what any of this is actually about. This is about the person you become when you commit to the idea that small and steady outperforms big and someday, because big and someday is the story most people are still waiting on. The fatter paycheck, the bonus, the inheritance, the mythical moment when starting finally feels worthwhile because the dollar amount finally feels worthy. That moment never arrives. And if it does arrive, the waiting habit arrives along with it. The money dissolves into a lifestyle that grew specifically to absorb it, and nothing of substance gets built. Small and steady isn't a runner-up trophy for people who lack better options. It is the mechanism. It is how the engine actually runs. The person funneling $100 a month, and the person holding out for the day they can afford $1,000. A month land at age 40 in entirely different worlds. The first one carries 40 years of compounding and a permanent partnership with discipline. The second one carries an intention that kept getting postponed, a savings cushion that kept getting drained, and the quiet realization that time was the only resource that was ever truly non-renewable. Time doesn't pause for the perfect amount. It works with whatever you hand it. You handed it $100. You handed it every month. You handed it 40 years. And it returned something that $100 could never purchase, that waiting could never assemble, and that shortcuts could never fabricate. It returned proof that the smallest version of the right move, repeated without interruption, eventually becomes something that resembles luck from the outside and discipline from the inside, and stands, in the end, as the most ordinary, extraordinary thing anyone can ever do with money. $100. Every month, starting today, the engine is open.